Welcome to this part 3 of my videos on using TinkerCAD to create a building for 3D printing for a model railway, in this case for a garden model railway. In part 1 showed you a technique for building bricks out of a wall out of individual bricks, and in part 2 I've demonstrated using code box, which is a feature of TinkerCAD that allows you to use code to create parts of multiple parts. In this part I'm going to show you how I developed some of the additional features. So initially I'm going to start using this, which is the wall shells as I left it at the end of part 2, and just give a few demonstrations of what we can do. So if you've seen the previous video, you know that these were the bricks were generated in 4 layers at a time. So if I click on them, they're in 4 layers. So there we go. And there's also rectangle boxes used to create the mortar that's inside, so that if you look, there's a small recess and then mortar inside. That's important to make sure there's no gaps in them. But one of the downsides of creating this using the code is that when I exported it, this became a single object. Then they're no longer individual bricks. So it'd be nice if you're creating a window just to remove the relevant bricks, but that's not actually possible. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to create a hole for the window, and we're going to just use the box. So in this case there's a shaded box, which is actually predefined as a hole. In fact, you could just use any of the other shapes and then just click the hole button. So when you bring it on, the only difference between a solid and a hole is pressing that button, but using this one just makes it a little bit easier. And what we're going to do is just position it where we want the window. Now when I created the real version, I'd measured this and counted the number of bricks and things like that, but for this purpose I'm just going to just demonstrate. So roughly about the size I want, and you'll see the box goes inside and outside the front, and at the moment if you look through it, it just shows it slightly shaded. What we now need to do is just select all the objects and group them together, and it'll apply this hole onto the shape. Taking a little while to redraw this. There we go. And as you can see, we've now got the whole shape. And basically we've pretty much covered most of the techniques that are required now. So notice I have a drain pipe on the model, so we just get the drain pipe to be the right width and then just draw it up. There we go. And if you want a drain pipe with the round clips that hold it in place, and it's as simple as creating a smaller a cylinder with a wider radius and less height, and then we can just move those up. Duplicate that and then move that. So there we've got 2. group those together, and we can give them a colour. There we go. So one thing to be careful of is that when you're going to 3D print these, obviously the colour's not going to come out in 3D printing. Also, you just might need to make sure that that's perfectly aligned with the height of the building as well, otherwise it's going to protrude. The door, similar technique. I've put the door on the side because I'm modelling this on a real building. Similar technique to the window. Obviously use the correct size. I'm just using this to illustrate it. Group them together. But then you create a door, which is another block that actually fits, but the door wants to be slightly recessed compared to the wall. So just use a different colour to highlight where the door is, and then you need to do the same on the inside. Make sure that it's slightly narrower. There we go. So got a door, got a window. So the next thing would be to make the sides should have a pitch roof, so they ought to have the additional bricks on each side. Now, when I did this originally, I would again be looking at making this the exact dimensions. You can just type them in here. I can't remember what they are offhand, but we'll just do it approximately. We can show how that would work. And here's the height. Duplicate. Oops. Move the roll. So building it up brick at a time till we do the side. You also need to build the sides of the mortar up. In this case, you could use the roof shape, but make it quite narrow. So you know. So I've only positioned these very approximately. Obviously, if you're creating this properly, you want to spend a bit more time than this. Make sure that everything's perfectly lined up and things like that. And then as you build the bricks up, you can follow this line. You can cut off the corners if you want by using an inverted roof or a wedge or something like that. So that shows you the rest of the brick building. For the next demonstration, I'll go back to my completed design. Let's go back onto So this is a complete one. One of the limitations of TinkerCAD is that once you go into it and start editing it, you're basically stuck with the changes you made. You can't go back to a previous save. You've got the simple undo option, but sometimes when you're designing something you might want to do a save as. You can't do that, so instead you need to duplicate it. So instead of opening the existing one, this will create a copy of Weybridge building, and you can sort of see some of the other techniques I've used here. So after putting the hole in for the window, I've built in a frame that's been designed to fit the window on the inside it includes an overhang. So this is just built up individually using individual blocks. You just bring them in, make them nice and small, long. It's just like you've got a wooden beam then, and then you move that into position. And so this one might form this one. Then you get some vertical ones. Basically, you get that idea. By designing it in here, I'm actually going to 3D print it as a separate part. But designing it within the building means that when I extract it, which I do, but just by making a copy, deleting everything else except the part I want, that means I can use this as a separate piece. So you can see that if I just go back to my designs. So I created the one object, which is this one, and then for the other parts I deleted the roof for that part, I deleted the building for that part, I deleted the building and the roof for that part, and then rotated the window so it lies flat, ready for 3D printing. Although you could do that in the 3D printer slicer software. Go back to my copy. So when I did the window, I did an overhang on the back. So for instance, if I move this out of the way, you see that this overhangs in the back. That way it gave me a surface that I could glue on when I 3D printed that. And it also gives a slightly wider layer around the back, so that I used a piece of Perspex to provide the see-through glass. Roof, this was the chimney first. We'll go through that. Chimney was just built up of individual bricks, again rotating, creating a layer, duplicating the layer all the way up, and then putting a cylinder on the top. One thing I've done, you can see here, I've not grouped it, but here's a hole which goes all the way through, provides a hole that I can run wires through, and I made a larger hole at the top so I could put a smoke generator in, which is one of the new features that I added in my later design. I'll show you the roof. Was created as a single box. So if I just show me using a copy, I'll just delete all this to demonstrate. So I used some struts to make it stronger, because when I printed off the first version I didn't use these struts and it was quite flexible and didn't sit quite straight. Also it makes it a bit more realistic, because you have these wooden trusses in a real wall. So what I'm going to do is just create a nice thin roof, and then just use the rotate until you get the right angle. So this is something, this took quite a bit of trial and error to get quite right. It actually helps if you get the dimensions right first, because if not, when you start stretching it, after rotating it, it'll go in a bit of a funny angle. But you can see you can be quite precise and keep moving. So I did spend quite a bit of time just moving it backwards and forwards, making sure that it all lined up. If I just show you approximately. Move it. That's roughly how I did it. But to get the textured effect on, as you see there, I've actually, if you look, I'll ungroup that. Each one is individually placed, just as I did the bricks in the initial design. I created one tile, duplicated it, created a row, then grouped the row, and then overlapped. As you'll see, they're all slightly different angle to the roof itself, just to give it a bit more of a shape, so that they're obvious that they're tiles. And just sort of put them on. Don't have to be quite exactly positioned correctly, because there is a solid surface underneath, so these gaps just happen to look quite realistic, I think, when they're 3D printed. Guttering. So guttering's another technique I used. So we just take a cylinder and rotate that so that it's so it lies flat, 90 degrees. Okay. Approximately the right width here. So there's the gutter, and I want a cutout, so I just duplicate that. There we go. And this second one, instead of being solid, turn into a hole. As you can see, it's given a bit of a gutter shape there. You can adjust the size of that so that it fits in a little bit better, as I've done there. But essentially, that's it. If you group those together, there we go. We've got pretty much a gutter shape. And that's pretty much it. So to keep these videos short, I'm not spending all the time lining them up as I did, because it did take several hours to do, a little bit of a time, and keep getting everything in the right position when I did the original design. But it shows you the various techniques that you'll need. And then once again, so it was printed as 3 parts. So when you get the parts, go into that, export an STL. That was all printed in brick coloured PLA, and then I just painted on black for the drain pipe, and I did put a little bit of a bit of weathering, or basically a bit of soot with a bit of back paint on the chimney. I haven't weathered the whole thing, but just to give it a little bit of an effect there. The roof is a little bit more challenging to 3D print. When I did the body, the main bit, I used scaffold, and it puts scaffolding inside the window and also on the edges, because I've made the top row of the bricks overhang a little bit, and so that was quite easily removed. On the roof, then, if you're going to print it like this, there's going to be an awful lot of scaffold used. So I did actually create a version where I filled in a little. It seems to be taking a long time to load this for some reason, so it seems to go quicker when I actually open it to edit it rather than just to view it. So actually, this demonstrates actually how I printed the roof. When you saw that draw, it actually showed that basically all I've done is I've created a massive hole that's occupied the whole of the bottom part, which you could just see when it was. So what I've done, I've actually created a little bit more of a pitched roof here. So these will be printed using the standard infill of the 3D printer, and then there's a bit less scaffolding that you have to remove, because it makes it slightly easier to clean up the scaffolding. Also cut out where the chimney goes. Again, all this is just created using these boxes. Make sure they're the right size, or just use the existing object and just turn it into a hole. But sometimes, for instance here, I had to make it slightly larger, so I did use a hole box, and I added a little pitch on a little ridge on the top as well. Pretty much that's it. So 3D printer's 3 parts. I used brick colour for the main part, white PLA for that, and black PLA for the whole of the top, which is the roof part. Put it all together, and that's it. So hopefully you found that useful. So effectively now we've gone through all the steps required for you to look at building a building. This is limited by the size of your build plate of the 3D printer, which in this case for a G-scale garden gauge railway just about fits. But if I'm going to have to go for want to do a bigger building, it's going to have to be printed in separate parts. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. Please like the video, leave comments if you think it's useful, and subscribe to my channel, and hopefully I'll be doing some more models for 3D printing in the future. Thanks for watching.